From twin boys that grew up not knowing each other but married a woman with the same name, to a bullet shot at a man only to kill him years later, we take a look at 10 of the most bizarre coincidences ever. Number 10. The bullet. In 1883, Henry Zieglin thought he had dodged fate. He broke off a relationship with his girlfriend who later committed suicide. The girl's brother became so angry that he hunted Zieglin down and shot him. Believing he had killed Zieglin, the brother then turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. The only problem? Zieglin was still alive. In reality, the bullet had only grazed his face and then became lodged in a tree. Years later, Zieglin went back to cut down the tree, which still had the bullet in it. Assessing the task to be too big for an axe or a saw, Zieglin decided to use some dynamite to take down the big tree. And that's when his luck ran out. The dynamite's explosion actually caused the bullet to be propelled into Zieglin's head, causing his death. Number 9. Swapped hotel findings. TV reporter Irv Kupcinet was in London to cover the coronation of Elizabeth II in 1953. As he was going through the drawers in his hotel room at the Savoy, he found a few items that had been left behind, and according to some markings, he discovered belonged to a man named Harry Hannon. Harry Hannon happened to be a basketball star who played for the famous Harlem Globetrotters, and, coincidentally, he was a very good friend of Kupcinet's. But that's not the end to this coincidental story. 2 days after the hotel room discovery, and before he could even talk to Hannon about what he found, Kupcinet got a letter from Hannon. And in the letter, Hannon told Kupcinet that when he was staying at a hotel in Paris, he looked in a drawer and found a tie with Kupcinet's name on it. Number 8. The Spy Next Door. There was no plan to include a Russian spy as a character in Norman Mailer's novel Barbary Shore. But as he began work on it, he decided that a minor character as a Russian spy in the US wouldn't be a bad idea. As the writing went on, this spy came to be the main character in the novel. After completion of the novel, a man was arrested by the US Immigration Service who lived just one floor above the author Norman Mailer in the same apartment building. This man, Colonel Rudolf Abel, was alleged to be the top Russian spy in the US at that time. Number 7. Two Mr. Brysons. The time? The late 1950s. A seemingly ordinary business trip. Mr. George D. Bryson stops and registers at the Brown Hotel in Kentucky. He signs the register and receives his room key to room 307. He later stopped by the mail desk to see if any letters had arrived for him. Indeed there was, and the girl behind the counter handed him the envelope, which was addressed to Mr. George D. Bryson, room 307. After opening the letter, Mr. Bryson found out that this letter was not actually intended for him. It had been sitting in the mailbox for a little while, and was originally intended for the last occupant of room 307, another man named George D. Bryson. Number 6. Twin Boys, Twin Lives. There are often astonishing stories of identical twins who live nearly identical lives. But the story of these identical twins born in Ohio may just top them all. These boys were separated at birth and adopted by different families. They weren't even aware of each other's existence. Both families named their adopted sons James. This is just the first of many astonishing coincidences. Both men trained for law enforcement, and both excelled in carpentry and mechanical drawing. The icing on the cake? Each James married a woman named Linda. Number 5. The Novel. In 1898, Morgan Robertson wrote Futility. The storyline? A transatlantic luxury liner named Titan on its maiden voyage. The Titan was touted as unsinkable, but in the novel, it hits an iceberg and sinks, and almost everybody aboard dies. We all know the rest of the story. 14 years later, in 1912, an actual transatlantic luxury liner named the Titanic was also widely touted as unsinkable. What happened? On her maiden voyage, she struck an iceberg and sank, and just about everybody died. In the novel, the wreck happened in April, just like the real thing. In the novel, there were 3,000 passengers aboard. On the real Titanic, 2,207. Number 4. The 21st. As a child, King Louis XVI of France was warned by an astrologer that he should beware the 21st day of each month. He took this so seriously that he never even did business on this day. Unfortunately for him, Louis was not always on his guard. In 1791, on June 21st, shortly after the French Revolution, Louis and his queen were trying to escape France but were arrested in Varennes. 3 months later, on September 21st, France proclaimed itself a republic and abolished the institution of royalty. After being in captivity for almost a year and a half, on January 21st of 1793, King Louis XVI was put in a guillotine and executed. Number 3. The taxi driver. A man was accidentally struck and killed by a taxi in 1975 while riding a moped in Bermuda. After his death, the man's brother inherited the moped. 1 year later, the brother was killed in the exact same way, riding the same moped. And, believe it or not, he was actually hit by the very same taxi, driven by the very same driver, who was even carrying the very same passenger. Number 2. A writer's plum pudding. French writer Émile Deschamps was treated to some plum pudding in 1805 by a stranger named Monsieur de Fortescue. Plum pudding is not the most common dessert on the menu, and 10 years later, when Deschamps saw it on the menu of a Paris restaurant, he wanted to order some. The waiter informed him that the last dish had just been served to another customer. That customer turned out to be Monsieur de Fortescue. Fast forward another 17 years, 1832. Émile Deschamps is at dinner and once again is offered plum pudding. His mind flashed back to the earlier incident, and he told all of his guests at dinner that the only thing missing from this story was Monsieur de Fortescue. At that very same instant, Monsieur de Fortescue, now senile, entered the room. Number 1. The Writer. While browsing Paris bookstores in the 1920s, American novelist Anne Parrish came upon a book that was one of her childhood favorites. It was called Jack Frost and Other Stories. She remarked to her husband how fondly she remembered this book as a child. As she handed it to him, he took the book, opened it, and read the inscription. It read, Anne Parrish, 209 North Weber Street, Colorado Springs. Yes, it was Anne's very own book from her childhood.